Second, Aaron. My titles are here.
It's just, yeah.
Does that need to tell about the name of the vote?
Well, this is weird for you to present it there.
Like that?
I don't know which one's better. I'm gonna tell which one. So,
That should do it, so since you don't have any presentations, it should be. Okay, I'm gonna start the video. And unmute. So whenever you let it back.
Just,
Nothing about wildlife act.
just some, yeah, some federal stuff that, I don't know if we want to send.
Kurt was the wrong place, so he's on his way out.
Okay.
I'm guessing Tommy might be with
No, I think so, let's give him, when you say what's the wrong place.
He went to like 109 South Main or something, I don't know, he said he saw some address on the invite or something, and I don't know, that's the wrong place he called me, he's like, where is this at?
This is good.
South Main. Well, not South Main.
I don't know, I have no idea.
Well, at least it's close, it's not like it's far away.
Yeah, we can short it.
That's a pretty loud excuse.
No, I mean, some,
Because you have 194 South Main is what you have on here.
Oh, is that it, 194, something like that? So I don't know if that is, or
I don't know why that's 194. Oh, because it's Berry City Center. Who sent that out? Mr. Goodman sent that out.
and so what is that?
no, I cut and paste. I do not send. I cut and paste.
You sent it. That's,
Oh, I guess it's my fault. It's ultimately my fault anyway, but we
it's kind of right next door to Cypress Grill.
Wonderful.
That's funny.
What's your name? You wonder why some people aren't here?
Well, I'm confident that I messed up. Oh, this is the only place we've ever met, so, I don't know, it seems like probably it's in the change.
Is that legal defense?
Common sense is what I was told, but it's a matter of fun.
Is Larry joining us, like, the other?
I do not know.
I didn't hear anything from him.
I've not heard anything from him, I've not even known him does guys.
Yeah.
So, hopefully he's gonna do somewhere and join us. Not anywhere.
Oh, no, here. Mr. Wilson.
Good morning, Jeff.
Hey, how are you? Thank you for everyone hanging in there. Kurt, thanks for joining us this morning. Let's go ahead and begin by having an opportunity for the public to visit with us. Any public comments, or anybody who would like to offer anything for the good of the order this morning? Anyone out in Zoom? Anyone in the audience wants to speak? Well, that leads us to item number 2, our illustrious mayor, Mr. Hanlon. Would you like to speak?
Great. Perfect time. Good afternoon, Water Committee. Thank you for what you're doing. I know this is a tough endeavor. Patrick, thanks for leading this, and to all of you who are on the Zoom call, Donovan, I see you, others that are part of the committee. Just want to start out by saying thank you for your volunteering on this. The topic's not trivial. I think it's the right time to be talking about this in terms of our future, obviously. And in a time when we have had a lot of rain, it's the best time to talk about water because people tend to forget about it. So I wanted to just maybe talk about expectations and make sure that we're aligned, was what I was hoping to do with you guys today. Did this very similarly with the Transportation Committee. I have a little bit of a sense of urgency to try to get some interim deliverables from this committee. And I can define what those interim deliverables could look like. But to put some context around my sense of urgency, I was writing down all the development that's coming in Kendall County. And I've seen reference to Kendall County in a lot of economic presentations throughout the state. I have a lot of people reach out to me when they're in different parts of the state and they go, what the heck is going on in Kendall County? And send me these slides that show a projected growth rate of 35% annually right now. That's a crazy number. And I'd be more than willing to share those slides with you. Now, those are probably economic slides. That may not represent population, but the growth rate in this community is getting a lot of attention statewide. It's in the top 5 in a lot of economic presentations that I have seen. Just looking at what we know is coming, in the developments that currently exist, both Southland and Regency are growing at a rapid pace. Those are in our city limits. Southland is also looking to expand. They have some property adjacent to where they currently are, and there's going to be more stuff coming. That's going to be a lot of houses, if that's approved by everybody. Regency is filling out pretty rapidly, as you guys know, and that brings a lot of population. The Esperanza, as we've talked to the developer out there, they have finished a lot of their core infrastructure work, and they are about to unleash and grow at a rate that's 3 times what they've ever grown at in terms of development. That's a lot of houses. You know, they're projected to be in that 3,000 house range. They're going to be growing very, very rapidly. Further down 46, that same developer of Esperanza had acquired 1,200 acres and is going to be building out a thing called George's Ranch. That's going to be roughly 1 house per acre, so another 1,000 houses coming. Spencer Ranch, also on 46, the other side, headed toward Bandera, is moving forward with its development, and there's an agreement that's been put in place with the city of Bernie and that group as well. That water is not going to be supplied by the city of Bernie, but it's going to be supplied by Kendall West Utilities, which you guys know what's going on with that. WCID number 3 has submitted their first plats. That's going to be coming fairly quickly. There's other development that is out near Comfort, which is interesting. The old cryogenics experimental thing that was going on out there, I think that's on Skyline Drive, has been purchased by a New York outfit, and they are looking to do a development as large as a large development, much like Tapatio. That's a lot of water that's going to be coming your way. And if you don't know about that from a Cow Creek standpoint, I'm hearing that from the locals up there. I've also talked to Commissioner Durden just to make sure he was aware. They are trying to do more acquisition of property and do a large development out there. My point in pointing all those things out is just with what I know, and that's not just in the city limits, that's why this is the Kendall County Water Committee. There's a lot of growth coming in our community that's going to be taxing our water supply. If I look back to that HBR study that was done that looked at the city of Bernie's water supply, it was pretty, again, in my opinion, insular in its view. It didn't look at all the things going on in our community. And there's a lot more going on today than was contemplated when that HBR study was done. That said we don't have any water problems for 7 years. I think that we do, personally. We know from the Bernie ISD demographics that we will double in size in Kendall County in the next 8 years, 8 to 10 years. That's a pretty big taxation on the water supplies that we have. If we had a drought like we had back in the 40s and 50s, we'd be in trouble, in my opinion. And that's just a layman's opinion. That's not a professional water guy's opinion. I just look at what happened back then, and I'm looking at what's going on. So with all that, right, House Bill 3883 and 3884 did not make it. I tried to support those every way I could, but I think the concept was good there. In the prior legislature, 2 years ago, there was a bill that was put forth, and if Larry Bailey is here, he would be able to talk to it in a lot of detail, but there was a bill that was tied to WCID number 3, which was to allow SAWS to come into Kendall County. And I worked with Representative Peterman to put some controls in place that would suggest it's not to provide unbridled water coming into Kendall County. The controls that we tried to attach in that bill that ultimately got vetoed by the governor were to put a control at the county level and not let this just be, again, unbridled growth. That's not what I would be looking for. So when I think of interim deliverables, with all that in mind, that's what creates my sense of urgency. We don't have a problem that's going to happen in the next year or two. The challenge will come in the next several years, and what you are focused on is a long-term trajectory in terms of what we need to be thinking about, no doubt about that, much like transportation. And the solutions aren't going to be instantaneous either. However, as I look at interim deliverables that I wish you could provide, I'm thinking of 3 things. One would be from a conservation standpoint. There are a lot of simple things that could be put forth, and we could actually do some things from a resolution or from a ordinance standpoint in the city of Bernie that can reinforce our need for conservation. We can support a lot of concepts and put that out for the public to consume. So any ideas around conservation that we can continue to promote and even legislate, if you will, within the city through resolutions or ordinances, I would be more than willing to entertain those and take those to council from you all. Secondarily, I think there are a lot of things that we can do from a rebate and reward standpoint to incentivize the proper behaviors. As the rain has been going on over the last couple of months as it has, it drives me crazy to go through the city of Bernie, my own neighborhood, and see people's sprinklers on. If they have intelligent systems, and I'm not pitching one because I have an interest in it, but I have a ratio system at my own house that is intelligent. It's not based on a rain sensor that detects water. It's based on predicted rain, right? And it uses weather forecasting technology to say, should you be watering or not? It's a great tool, and it saves a ton of water. And, my water system never waters when it's about to rain or when it has rained. I think there's a lot of things we can do to incentivize those kinds of smart technologies, and they don't cost a lot of money, and I think the city can budget for those things, frankly. So if you guys could put together your list of ideas, much like we did back in the 80s and 90s, right? Go to low flow toilets, or whatever those ideas may be. You guys have a lot of ideas, I'm certain of that. So anything around rebates, rewards, again, that the city can help. I also think that the city of Bernie, based on what happened, we got lucky in February when the freeze happened. There are a lot of communities around here that went without water for a week. We do have multiple water supplies, but they can easily be taxed. We don't have a complete closed loop system through all of our water supplies. Fair Oaks suffered in the southern part of Fair Oaks. They're on SAWS. A lot of those folks went without water for, again, multiple days. Other parts of Fair Oaks are on GBRA or another water source. I think that Bernie needs a backup water source. The 3 we have are not going to be adequate forever, and I think that there are going to be emergencies, much like we experienced this year, that point to the need for a backup water source. And the only backup water source I'm aware of would be SAWS or Kendall West. So anyway, whatever your thoughts are around that, I think that's an important deliverable. I don't know if it's an interim. I think a lot of thought has to go into that, and we have to talk about, we have experts like Don Burton up here who are from SAWS that can help understand the value or the risks that come with that. But I think that there's something that we ought to start thinking through and talking about and starting to plan for. And if you guys, I don't know how long you are planning to continue meeting, but as you continue your thoughts, I think a backup water source is going to be important to consider as well. Yeah, so those are all the comments I have. Happy to be a resource to you guys in any form or fashion, whether that's communication, awareness in the community. Those can be part of the interim deliverables as well. I don't think this has been a high interest topic yet, but I think it will become one. So to the extent that I, in the role that I sit in, can be a resource for you guys, to the extent that council can be something that we continue to update us one time, again, just to raise the awareness of what's going on within this committee, I think that I would put that out there as another interim thing that would be worthwhile. So just wanted to put those items out there for you guys to think through.
Thank you, Mayor. And while you're here, I don't know if anyone has any questions, but we can entertain a few. If there are.
Absolutely.
Anyone physically present that'd like to ask a question, man? How about anyone online? I get your internet off easy today.
I think you were clear as crystal. I really appreciate the fact that of all the different projects that are going on, and this projected growth rate is pretty staggering. But yeah, I'm more than happy to come up with some ideas for resolutions, ordinances, and rebate programs, reward programs. I'll look forward to digging into that.
I know we've talked about it before, and I've been on part of council in one form or fashion for the last 3 years. We've talked about those kinds of things, but we've never actually taken action on any of those things. So talk is cheap. I think we need to put some definitive actions out there that people can say, I get why this is important, and I see there's value in this, and if I'm incentivized, or if I'm rewarded, or if I'm made aware, then I think those things are important. That's part of the role that council should be playing on this topic.
Well, and I'd also like to, I'm going to be talking a bit about the Internet of Water stuff, but we did run BNA's model that we showed you guys the other day on the call of the city. And I'm sworn to secrecy about the actual details because I think they're still truthing it, but at the same time, I can tell you, for me, it was eye-opening about the water situation, like very eye-opening. So I think you're absolutely right that, that 7-year horizon or what have you is maybe realistic, but definitely we're in that sort of ballpark in terms of needing to potentially add more supply.
Yeah. Again, that's good, and I love what we're doing on that Internet of Water thing. I like the multivariate analysis that can be done on that. You're the one who created the contact there, but thanks for doing that. I think it's a cool tool. Again, I geek out on that kind of stuff because data is data, and data ought to be driving our decisions, not emotion. Yeah. Awesome. Well, as I leave, just want to thank you all once again for being volunteers on this committee, or volunteered, whatever the right word is, whatever the right verb is. I think you guys will have a high impact on the future of the entire community. This isn't just a burning thing. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Mr.
All
Mayor.
right.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Let's transition to subcommittee reports. Ben?
Yeah, so as I was just conferring, we've met with the city of Bernie about the Internet of Water and sort of been enrolled in as a more formal partner. I mean, obviously they've been a partner, but really didn't make them essentially a formal partner. Up to date, I've been working a lot with Mike Mann at the utilities, and I've been very impressed with his supply of data, and really enjoyed working with you, Mike. I know you're on the call, so I hope you hear that. We're also looking at bringing in Texas Water Development Board as a formal partner, because our goals, while we see Bernie as a place to prove this concept, but really we're looking at it as something that can be spread throughout the region to really create a true Internet of Water. And then our next step from a committee standpoint, so we've received commitment from the Mitchell Foundation that they're going to be supporting us with funding. The city of Bernie has budgeted some funding as well to play a role in this project. But we're going to be going into the data gathering, the hub construction, and the dashboard creation phase with the intention of having the full beta system up and running by the end of this year. I think we could probably move even faster than that, but that's the game plan. One of the cool things is that the Internet of Water team at Duke has basically been working on these very sort of plug-and-play systems that are relatively cheap to put together and low-tech, if you will. And so we're going to see if we can leverage those, because that's how we also see it being easy to adopt by other regional communities. So we can really see this at a regional level. And then, of course, with the ARPA money, the recovery program money, we may look for opportunities to leverage that to the benefit of both creating this system, but also promoting elsewhere in the region. So we, again, achieve not just a Bernie data hub, but a regional Internet of Water that really helps us understand where we stand in the water supply of the region.
And Ben, when you say plug and play, can you be more descriptive about what you mean?
Yeah, so this is called a federated system. Basically, instead of having one central sort of command and control where everybody sends their data. The idea is that each entity, each utility would upload their data to a spreadsheet on, say, a Dropbox, or it could be a Google Drive, and our system would point to it, basically say, okay, we're going to extract some of that data that's been uploaded to that drive, and brings it in, and then what it does is it would run through a fairly simple technology that can produce graphs and charts and things like that, so that you can how do I put this? I apologize. I don't remember the actual name for the software, but it's just apparently, relatively speaking, pretty user friendly. It's not something where you have to have a high level understanding of technology to make it work. Once we get it running, it should be something that's easy to maintain and keep an eye on.
In terms of inputs and formatting, how convoluted is that? I mean, because we're going to be looking for voluntary participation from forest fires.
So the first step on that is for everyone to agree on what sort of data we're going to be gathering and agree to provide that data. And then after that is literally as easy as filling out a updating a spreadsheet that can be on a Google Drive or a Dropbox, a shared drive platform. As long as I put the right numbers in the right boxes, the system will pull from that data.
Is there already something kind of standardized that's out there in terms of reporting that can be adapted?
Well, so yeah, to that point, that's exactly what the Internet of Water's created. Is they've already got a model that they use in North Carolina. That's the latest one they've built. It seems to be the more robust one. So we could potentially, essentially, utilize the exact same technology. That's our plan, is to use the exact same format, the exact same approach, because they found it to be simple and easy to maintain.
And what I'm getting at is how do we help incentivize people and make it easy for people to want to participate and provide that data? Because if they have to add a whole new set of parameters for their work, then if we're creating work for people, that's a business thing. So we're going to incentivize that. We'll make it super duper easy. We'll take existing information and funnel it in.
I think that's the key, is to make it super duper easy, and the real management effort really would probably come potentially on the city side, or some collaboration with the city, and if it's our entity or another entity like the Water Development Board. So we have to figure out who's actually hosting and managing that system. We're working on with the city because they're a very trusted resource for water information. But the actual, so in other words, the actual data supplier should not have it shouldn't be onerous on them to provide that data. It should be a very simple process of simply opening up a spreadsheet, entering in the data and the various columns, and hit and save. Honestly.
Do we have a sample of that or something we can start circulating to people talking about?
Good question. I could ask Ashley at the Internet of Water to provide us with a sample of that, for sure.
I mean, I'm not speaking from experience, but it seems common sense to me that adding work is going to be an issue, so we want to make sure that this is as simple as possible and we give something back in exchange for what we're giving.
Yeah, giving something back, that's the tricky part, I suppose, and that'd be something to noodle on. They've made it simple on their side on purpose for that exact same reason, because they don't want it to be onerous. They want it to be easy to upload. And if anything's onerous, it's on the side of the people who are actually maintaining the data.
If we're talking about a collaborative circumstance, Internet of Water, and we're talking about regional problems, then it seems like part of that is to give back. You know what your neighbors are doing, what they're experiencing, and you can compare that in like terms with what you've got. That would seem to be something.
So I think that would be the value proposition, unless we can come up with something more enticing. A steak dinner, I don't know. It's like, I think you're right. I think that's the logic, the value proposition.
Well, I'd like to hear from folks on that. Talk to our neighbors, and maybe speak to that today when we come up. Maybe we can reach out to some other folks and get their sense of things. All right, thank you for the bit on the Internet of Water. Conservation kind of falls in your lap as well, Ben. I'm not sure what you say about that, but I want to speak about it.
Well, we also have Donovan on the call. SAWS, of course, is very well respected for their water conservation strategies. And I was talking to Tom Gartrue recently. We were at an event together, and I was saying that I think it might make sense for us to chair of that committee is Charlene Lurie, who's, oh man, I always forget, she's Texas Water Trades or something. But anyway, she's former MIT, and, I don't always say, oh yeah, Ivy League, oh boy, that makes you really, brilliant and special, but I think MIT does vet its students pretty well, and to achieve a degree from MIT is no slouch. She's proven herself to be very intelligent in my conversations with her.
I just remembered you saying that there were some others out there that had found conservation efforts that they were finding good results with. So what I hear you saying is that that's cherry pick, that's fine. Can we make a point of getting a group of them together to digest what they have to say within the next month or so, so we can start putting together that deliverable 4 years in?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That makes sense.
So, Saws in Austin, Donald will work with you guys, and to reach out to Austin, and let's see if there are another 1 or 2 folks we ought to be speaking to that we can bring to the table.
Yeah, the other person that comes to mind is there's a professor who specialized in how you price water. We already have, of course, I saw the water presentation that the city had recently, but we have a graduated pricing scheme where, if you're using below 10,000 gallons, you get a certain price. As soon as you jump above it, the price goes higher, and I think you push up to 30,000, which is a lot. You're paying a lot more. But they were looking at it from a standpoint of both water conservation outcomes, because sometimes you really have to go pretty far with that pricing as you start to get the higher levels of use, but then also trying to make sure that it's equitable, so you're not priced, so that the whole scheme isn't pricing those who have income constraints out of the market essentially. I remember, on the one hand, it seems pretty simple, like the system that we have that he was demonstrating to this audience that I was a part of, that it's much more nuanced and to use those pricing schemes to both achieve equity outcomes and reduce water use. People that are not well resourced financially, they don't use a lot of water anyway, frankly. It's usually people who are extremely wealthy that just don't even look at their water bill and aren't affected by it, even really high prices that tend to be the greatest users of water, abusers of water, you might say.
Patrick, excuse me. So that's why we priced our rates the way we did, Ben. The entry level is always where we are most reluctant to increase rates. But as you use more and more into what is clearly to us irrigation purposes, then if you're really, really going to use a lot of that, then you really, really need to pay for it. And that also helps fund conservation programs, is the way we look at it. And we have had internal meetings this last 6 weeks, city staff, to talk about just basic conservation programs, and I'm certainly interested in what the other cities are doing. We've had conversations with SAWS before, and we'll do it again. But we also budgeted, it's a beginning, we budgeted $25,000 in the new budget, so that we would have something to fund, like the mayor was referring to, basic rebates for better technology, for change out of turf grass to something more Texas native, low flow toilets. I don't know if there's too many of them still out there, but if you did have one, we could change that out as well. But also maintenance of irrigation, because a lot of people, they have these systems in place, but they're spraying on the driveway, on the street. So we did have discussion about that, water catchment, reuse, rainwater, all that we're willing to entertain and want to be a part of the discussion. So we're ready to go. Now Brian Bass will be involved in that as well, Mr. Mann on the call. And I think I will be. I'm still around part-time for another 3 months. So I believe I'll continue to participate in this. I think Ben's fine with that. So.
Yeah, very cool. So I'll work hard to gather that list of ideas that the mayor is referring to, that you guys are talking about. These ideas, I'm sure you're researching too.
Yep.
I like, let's get lots of eyes on it. Look well outside the box, if you will. Sort of our region, and really look at what the innovative strategies are. Heck, nationally and locally is my attitude. So that.
I think the key really though is right now.
Yeah.
That we're interested in any idea that makes sense. Hopefully it's simple.
Right, exactly.
Because we don't have a whole lot of staff to dedicate to doing it. We don't have somebody that goes into homes and yards and examines irrigation systems. We don't have that staff at this time. But if there's another way to accomplish that, through outsourcing or whatever, then yeah.
hard time hearing you, and we want to make sure we catch what you have to say. Donovan, you're not coming in very clearly. We're not hearing you well.
If I can change.
Much better.
There you go.
microphone, is that working?
Yeah, that did.
Much better. Thank you, Donovan. If you don't mind, start from the top.
Okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say, I look forward to the discussion, but what we're finding, one of our biggest bangs for our buck is really through technology and giving the tools to the customer. And so that's even less staff work in terms of what you have to do. But allowing for the customer to have kind of that personal thought process of how much they're using, be able to see the flow coming through, certainly automated metering and the irrigation control, the electronic irrigation control, all these little technology tools and phone apps that give the customer the ability to kind of really see what they're doing, really is having some of the biggest bang for the buck, even over some of the hard infrastructure that you have to do as well. So I look forward to that.
Thank you, Donovan. Anyone else have thoughts to offer on this?
I mean, the one thought I do have, and this is probably more going into Larry Bailey's wheelhouse, but, I worked with him on HB 383, and one of our frustrations is the construction codes, the way that Texas regulates them does prevent us from doing a lot of what I would consider to be smart preventative measures in the new build situations. It can't be required. And so that is one thing that I think hamstrings us as far as our ability to use regulations with greenfield build out. And so then the question becomes, are there ways that we can influence construction of these? I mean, also, we know a lot of this development's WCIDs and BUDs and other things like that. So the question becomes, are there other ways that we can, none of it's incentivize or at least just encourage the builders to do the smart, responsible thing that actually, I think, helps keep their business model thriving, It's a stretch, if they can make better use of the molecules of water that we have available, then potentially they have more capacity to build in the street. Just a thought, but, that's something that really frustrated us, and anyway, there were conversations with the Texas Association of Builders behind the scenes where probably they didn't express any positive interest in these ideas.
Who do we have to speak to those concepts?
The building practices, I worked with, like I said, I worked with Larry, so I already compiled a short list of solutions, a good 12, pretty solid idea, methods that builders could employ to reduce water consumption. So what I'll do is dust that off.
Right.
And Ben, you don't think those could be implemented locally because of the state law? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think they can be implemented locally, but I think it's gonna have to be on a volunteer basis, is my understanding. And you guys, certainly you can talk to your all's attorney and say, well, how can we, there's what am I trying to say? You all use the International Construction Code, and then there's something called the International Green Construction Code, and it's gone through several iterations. There's 2015, I can't remember the years. I believe the city of Dallas adopted one of those, and then that created a backlash, I guess, from the building industry.
Yes.
The 2015 one. And then there's some rule that says you can only adopt these after they've been in place for 3 cycles. And I don't know if that's 3 cycles of, is that 3 legislative cycles? I have no idea what that means. That's, to me, I don't know, you're a lawyer, I don't know. I don't know what that means. But if we could look at that and say, hey, well, within those cycles, at least we can get to some level, that might be a smart investment. The other thing too, frankly, with that is that it would be a whole package, so it's not just water, it's also energy. And we're an energy constrained state, and at this point, honestly, most of the energy is probably going to come from West Texas, from solar panels, because of the cost efficiencies of doing that, but that means power lines, which turns the hill country into what I call power line country. Exactly.
The mayor did mention that he was at least behind resolutions or ordinances to put in place that would back up whatever we felt like we could do on that front. For instance, we have one in place right now, I think for a large acreage lot, we only allow 75 feet of turf grass within the surrounding the home. You know, so that's an ordinance that's in place today. Now, then you get to enforcement. You know, as that's happening in the field and as these new homes are being built, do we have enough eyes in the field to enforce that? So, but that's an example of one that's in place today. Based on what you said, I'm not sure it is enforceable versus the state laws,
But there may be ways to incentivize people too. And if you're talking about a green energy code, if you make it, if there's an incentive there, a cash incentive, whether it's an offset in cost somewhere down the road or whatever, I mean, lead certification has made an impact. And there's certain people that want that just for the value of having an association with it. So I think we need to hear what those potential solutions are, what the requirements are, and then put some brainpower to it. But I mean, I don't want to say no until we hear what the options are and what the issues are.
So a good point there too, Patrick, is I told you we budgeted $25,000 to spend, to give out, to do whatever, but there's also billing credits that you basically lose revenue. It's kind of the same thing, but then again, it's not a line item in the budget. I feel fairly confident the council would consider something like that as well. If you do one of these things, then you're going to get a credit of X on your bill for 2 months, 3 months, whatever. I don't know if SAWS doing programs like that, Donovan?
I apologize, I had to step away for a second, so I missed the first part of that.
That was brilliant. You should go back. We were talking about things you can do through ordinances and resolutions to help control water consumption, and Patrick had brought up possibly rebates on water bills for some of these technology installations like you were referring to, and I was just wondering if you had any programs like that in place.
Yeah, we do have, we have custom rebates, we have various different rebates that are SAWS related. Mostly our city ordinances are focused on restrictions and, drought restrictions and that sort of thing. One issue just from an ordinance perspective on rebates, and it doesn't go to small rebates, but there is a federal tax law that says if you receive a rebate of over $600, you actually have to pay taxes on it. And so that's actually something we're working from a federal standpoint to have the federal government change that with electric utilities. You don't have to pay tax on that, but with water you do. So that's a federal issue, not a local issue, but kind of a disincentive for local rebates.
Donovan, if you look at rebates or discounting impact fees or rates, can you not just set a different rate for somebody in a different category, so you're not actually giving them a rebate, you're just giving them a completely different rate, so it doesn't hit that tax?
Just in terms of tiered rates, we do have, obviously like most people, you use less, you pay a lower rate, but I don't know about in terms of or are you saying just a discount on a bill?
No, I'm just saying, just the thought popped in my head, you could do like a green rate, if you meet these certain items, you have a separate rate. You're already graduating the rates anyway, you have a separate rate for people who do certain things, and then that's not a discount.
Right. Once you pay your bill according to green building code or whatever, then if they qualify on all fours with whatever that is, then maybe there's a different package.
But you're talking about a different rate class.
Yes, a different rate class.
I know we have not considered anything like that, but
Yeah, we have a rates advisory committee that, every 5 years we go and reestablish our rates. And so we started it last year, but obviously COVID kind of got in the way. We sort of put it on hold for a while, and it'll start back up. But those are the kinds of things you run through the rates advisory committee to see how it will actually impact your rates ultimately. But I think
It's a question worth asking, so.
Donovan, just as long as we have you, don't run away yet, I'm curious if the city of San Antonio has looked at this matter of construction codes and come up with any strategies as, to ensure that new builds are more water efficient.
Yeah, and in fact, I'll answer it sort of two ways. One, we went to the legislature this time because the bill that passed that passed last session that required you to comport with one of the 3 building codes. It was a question of whether it interfered with the existing conservation ordinances that we have. the requirement to have certain type of fixtures and that sort of thing. And so we actually clarified that in the legislature that says if you do have conservation ordinances, if it's part of your conservation plan, that you can have your local ordinances and it doesn't interfere with the complying with those codes. So that was a legislative effort that we did get passed. I forget if it's now or September 1st, but that is law now. And the other thing, this isn't really about efficiency, but what we ran into during the freeze is that the temperature in the codes that people have to comply with, we may need people to sort of insulate better so that they're insulating their pipes better and so that they don't break during a freeze kind of thing. So that's one of the areas that we'll be looking for through the local codes, local EPC codes. But in terms of conservation ordinances, we already do that. We have those in our ordinances already.
All right, well, that might be something we need to cherry pick from, for sure.
Share those with you.
All right, so I've got, Donovan will be reaching out to you to get you some time, or some of your folks some time to talk about conservation issues next meeting. You'll be reaching out to Ben, the Dawson folks, Sherwin, Ryan. Maybe Jeff, we can talk a little bit about graduated pricing.
Sure.
You're going to talk about construction options and green building code issues, and that'll be pretty good little things to discuss on conservation. If there's something else that needs to be added to that, let me know between now and next meeting, and we'll do our best to get it on the agenda.
Donovan, I wonder if we might be able to, I can't remember, you guys have that woman who oversees a lot of your conservation program. I wonder if we might be able to entice her to speak to us and kind of give us a rundown. Just so we're
Yeah, we'd love to. Karen Guz is our director of our conservation program. She's internationally known. We can absolutely make her available to auditor her to full group or small group.
that would be super helpful.
All right. Any other thoughts or comments from your group? Then?
Well, I mean, so actually, Mr. Mackin, I see you're on the call. I don't know if you're at your desk and might be able to talk to us, but with this pending sale of your company, I'm wondering if there's somebody that we might be able to reach out to regarding water data.
Ben, that's going to be addressed later.
Oh, my apologies. Thank you. Oh, I see it.
Patrick, this is Mike Mann. One other thing that I think is big for conservation here in Bernie locally and affects the region is the success of our reclaim program. So either I or Jeff, whoever will be presenting next time, will send some information about the success of that program and kind of put things in perspective.
And Mike, I imagine y'all have brainstormed and looked at the future of that program and where you're going to. I imagine you'll be including that in the discussion as well.
Sure, and I've been in extensive contact with DNA, who's modeling all that into the model.
Thank you, Mike. Any other thoughts on this topic? All right, anything else from your group, Ben?
No, I've got a full to-do list now. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Mr. Bailey's not able to join us today, so Kurt, we'll move over here. You are handling things for comment today.
Yes, sir. So I think our agenda for the planning committee right now, we have a couple of gentlemen here, and I don't see Gene, so I think we've got George Wisman and Larry Biddle here from their respective organizations. Mr. Wisman's with Trinity Glenrose Groundwater Conservation District, and he's going to kind of go through a couple of things. I think the hope for us is to kind of talk about some of the issues that they see on the horizon and some of the challenges from the broader perspective of the water community around Kendall County. And so these are our neighbors, and people who share. And obviously, water doesn't see the political boundaries, so these are the guys that we interact with on a regular basis. Ben and I know these guys pretty well from the groundwater district, and so there's an opportunity for them to share with this group sort of their insights on water in the region. So George, I think, is ready, and he's on the Zoom call here. If you want to introduce yourself some more, George? Or?
Sure. Good morning, folks. My name is George Westman with the Trinity Glen Rose Groundwater Conservation District. I've got a couple of slides, if I could share my screen. Okay, just to give you a little background, as you kind of asked for. Here's our district boundaries. Basically 1604 to the south, 471 to the west. County line to the north with the exception of some incorporated areas in Fair Oaks. And Nacogdoches to the east there. A little bit of background, we were created by the ledge in 2001, confirmed by voters in 2002. I believe the same time as Cow Creek was created. And this was all done as we were kind of outlined in that pigment area, the priority groundwater management area by TCEQ. So as I talked about, our boundaries do include a lot of the incorporated areas of Fair Oaks Ranch, also into Kendall and Comal counties. We were created with one extreme exception. We have full chapter 36 authority, but the exception is that all of the public water supply wells drilled before the creation of the district before 2002 are exempt from our regulation. Currently that equates to about 80% of water produced in Earth County. With all these exempt wells, and some work we've done in the past trying to identify if all of these exempt wells were active at some point in time, the pumpage from those wells would exceed our modeled available groundwater in order to kind of maintain this desired future condition. We're a fee-based district, not a taxing entity. We went back to the legislature. We were at $10 an acre foot in the inception of the district. We got our fees increased to $40 an acre foot. And we're currently charging $30 an acre foot for water produced from the area. We have a 10,000 gallon a day limit versus the 25,000 gallons a day for regulatory authority. We don't regulate the exempt use as far as domestic and livestock. We're responsible for permitting groundwater pumpage from the other wells, the 20%. We also set forth construction rules. We have an interlocal agreement with Sauls currently to take care of the processing and the construction inspection of the current wells that are constructed on an annual basis. And we're currently working on developing quantitative operating permits for that 20% and future development of wells within our district. We expect to have something up potentially within about 12 months. Just to give you an example, here are all the public supply wells within our district that are exempt from our regulation. Now, these wells do pay production fees to us. If they didn't, we would kind of find it hard to even exist. The primary use in our district comes from the water marketers that drilled wells before the creation of the district. And I would imagine, I wasn't around at that time, that they had a hand in obtaining this exemption from the bill. If you look here in the middle of the screen, these are the wells that currently Sauls has a contract with. They're called the Rogers and Stein wells. Under the Sauls contract, they have the potential to pump up to 17,000 acre feet a year. The contract is due to expire in 2027, and from my understanding and talking to Sauls, and Donovan can confirm this, that contract is not going to be extended. The additional 17 wells over in this area In 2018, we were notified that they were going to be put online and potentially serve water outside the county. They have not been put online to date, and are not currently pumping any water, although the owner of these wells is building infrastructure to push water from the contracted well with Sauls and these potential wells into northern Bexar County in an effort to be prepared to serve water probably to future developments in Comal and Kendall County. In 2018, when they came to us about these 17 wells here, it was a New York-based firm that bought into these water marketing wells in red here. The wells in blue over on this side are currently still owned by Water Exploration Company. We've not heard much about them being activated, but the potential for these wells to come into use down the road exists also. So this is our biggest challenge locally, is dealing with these water marketing wells and trying to work with these individuals. They're not that forthcoming with information about their future endeavors, so we continue to try to work with them and get information from them. Here's some historical numbers for northern Bexar County and water produced. As we talked about, 80%, roughly about 80% is exempt. 80% of the water use is exempt. Our MAG in Bexar County is 25,511 acre feet annually in order to maintain the DFC and comply with the DFC. As you can see, for the past 10 years, we fluctuated between or under the number of 25,511 for maintaining that DFC, but I can't speak to the future right now as to whether or not that we'll kind of maintain that 25,000 acre feet to support the DFC. You asked about kind of regional management and how I see it, and I'm giving you my opinion only. This is how I see things happening, at least at the local level. I spend about 95% of our time on managing local issues. I spend about 5% of our time on regional DFCs that water development boards mandate. I do believe that there needs to be a more collective regional approach to the Hill Country groundwater situation. How that looks, I don't have the answer to that right now, so I believe that's it. I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
George, on the regional approach, I know that's something that we've talked about at the GMA level for years now. And it's come up in the legislature a couple of times, even with some bills that have not really gotten a lot of steam at the legislative level, but have made an appearance. Have you heard anything recently that we expect to see that coming up in the next session?
No, and in talking to Larry Bailey this last go around before 3883, I thought we would see a bill from Biederman that talked about consolidation, because we were Larry had mentioned that to us, but I guess they went that different direction.
Yeah, I think I had a similar conversation with Biederman and his team on that as well. I kind of was expecting maybe a bill to come out of there, but I guess in my opinion, I think we're going to see that again. I just don't know where it's going to come from.
True. We have the hardest challenge here in Bexar County with that exemption. Luckily over the past 15 years, we've been able to, well, we haven't been, but production has maintained itself below the kind of MAG that we've been allotted by the Water Development Board to sustain the DFC. So we've been lucky in that respect. We've had communications with, like I said, Texas Water Supply and the water marketers. Conversations really haven't gone anywhere. Donovan, I don't know if you're still on, but I hope that contract is not going to be extended in 2027, which will free up some water, which I know I'm not naive enough to think that that water is not going to go up into Kendall and Comal counties.
Yeah, well, I'll speak to that. Certainly, today's management, that's a 2027 decision that, obviously other boards can make other decisions, but our clear intent right now is to get out of that contract. It is it's a highly volatile contract that the former Bear Met got into. We had to incorporate it into our system. It's up to 17,000 acre feet a year, but that's only if, depending on the levels, and it's almost never at that level. In fact, it's much, much less. They have a lot of water quality issues and some of those. So that contract, we always have a difficulty of whether we should budget for 17,000 acre feet of purchase,
Right.
or, more of an average of, less than 10,000. So it's even a financial difficulty. But as you said, just because we canceled the contract in 2027, or not canceled, but terminated, it doesn't mean that water is not going to be piped. That is absolutely what we're doing day in and day out, is trying to find buyers in Comal and Kendall County. So I definitely would say that's their goal, is to keep the pumps turned on and keep the water flowing, and just go to a different buyer. And I think that's their intention, and that was really their intention behind putting forth a huge effort to keep us from supplying water to our CCN area, is because they wanted to make sure that they could sell that Trinity water up in that area.
Correct. Donovan talked about the contract. There is one good item in that contract. When the aquifer beats a certain level, 600 feet above mean sea level, they shut down that site, so there's no pumping. So when we're in very dry times, in my opinion, that cutoff point in that contract is a kind of blessing to me, at least locally.
George, what's your opinion? I know we've been had this discussion, and our group has this discussion on a regular basis, but kind of talked about that, the DFC, and you guys, your 25,000 mag, you're bumping up in 2019 in that 23,000 range. What's your foresight on what we as groundwater districts are going to do or have to do when we start hitting those mag numbers?
I know we're working on the current round of DFCs. We've kept the DFC the same, the proposed 30-foot drawdown across the board, which doesn't mean 30-foot with everyone. I think when you look at it, it equates to about 60, 65 feet of drawdown in Dark County as we're down dip here. I can see, and I've had a conversation, we had a meeting yesterday on the DFCs. I can see a more localized approach, county by county, geographic areas kind of looking at their own DFCs. If we're not able to make any strides on our legislation, we're probably going to have to raise our DFC or lower it.
So that actually brings up something we've been talking about in our district, is what does the DFC mean if you just have to keep lowering it and lower it to, where does it end?
To accommodate pumping?
Yeah.
There's somewhat of a related question, this is just for the non-large at the table, but what do we have in the way of a sort of series of maps or master map looks at connectivity or potential connectivity?
I'm not aware of any master map. I know the data exists. We probably have some stuff in the groundwater district that starts to leak at that.
How hard would it be to accumulate something like that with our neighbors?
I don't think it would be terribly hard.
You're talking about
You're talking about even the water providers as well, so
Mike's still on, he can answer that better than I think we're gonna have pipelines for the city of Verney, but not, as you just said, regional. Mike, go ahead.
We do have a map of our pipelines, we don't have a map of everyone's. But, you know, when you start talking about interconnectivity, there are some regulatory challenges where utilities can't be directly connected to each other. Transferring water has to go through certain backflow prevention devices, those kind of things. So I get the concept of having a shared bank of water, but you get into operations issues and water quality issues that we need to consider too. We can certainly, you know, try to integrate maps, but how to interconnect would be an issue.
Well, and maybe that's a longer term question, but you can begin to ask the question or know how to ask the question until you know whether or not there's a possibility, whether it makes sense. Because there's a financial cost of connectivity, there's a legislative or legal cost of it, and there's probably a quality control cost. But everybody seems to be saying we need to have a regional approach. You can keep saying it all you want, but until you do something about it, it's just a bunch of talk.
I think, I'll look into where we can pull the data, try to get something pulled together. I think, you know, Mike, I think if we can, you know, obviously we don't need every pipe within the system. I think you're just looking at kind of the larger,
Right.
you know, the branch lines and the big transmission lines throughout the systems, you know, that, you know, kind of look at that bigger transmission, but.
I'd be happy to sit down and talk about the nuances of all of that with you.
Yeah, that'd be great. We can set up something, Mike, and we'll start there.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike. Is that something, Mr. Wisman, that you guys have access to?
No, utility maps, no. You know, I know we're working on some modeling, cohesion with Kendall County at this point possibly, for the formation itself, but not utility maps, no.
Yeah, I think George, we just, Cow Creek, just this last meeting, we approved a study for Kendall County on this issue of mags and kind of getting a better feel for the hydrology, the underground hydrology within Kendall County. We envision that's going to be something that we can share and work with George and the surrounding groundwater districts, and then ultimately even bolt on to that. We're, you know, kind of starting with the model of Kendall County and then we'll go
Sure.
from there. So it is an ongoing new. We just approved that. We expect to get that data back somewhere in November. I think what the timeline was. So.
Yeah, and you're working with the same consultant that we had worked with, James Beach, so yeah, I was glad to hear that.
Yeah, we're very excited about that project at Cow Creek. So.
That sounds good.
You know, and with that, with Cow Creek's resources and some of the groundwaters, and we may not know all the distribution of where all the pipelines are, but we do have a good feel for where all the source water is from. At least where they're bringing it, the groundwater, so not surface water, but all the groundwater sources.
Well, and I feel the need that we need to work closer because we've done some modeling with LBG Guyton and James Beach on some refined models for northern Bear County, and you know, the more pumpage, since we're down dip that goes on here, Bear County has a direct impact to Kendall County, so.
Yeah, it's a very good point. It's something we watch at the groundwater district there. We're fully integrated, and whatever happens down there affects us up here in Plymouth County.
And I think, isn't BNA's modeling gonna try to take that into account from a regional availability, how weather affects groundwater levels in various areas? Or is she focusing just on the city of Verney system?
She really seems to be focusing mostly on the city of Verney system. When you start getting into those other considerations, it's a pretty big data question.
Sure.
And I don't think that's in our scope of work at this time. I do think it's something worth us tuning into though and looking at. I mean, you know, the Bureau of Economic Geology, Dr. Michael Young, you know, they were trying to create an agreement or actually get funding from the state to do modeling of really surface water and groundwater availability in one complete package. And yeah, that got shut down. It got through the House, but it didn't pass the Senate committee hearing. And the question, of course, is, do they really want to know how much water we have? Are they concerned we don't have as much as they think we have, or what's the deal? Because it didn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me to not look at surface water and groundwater and how that, you know, what that full dynamic looks like. But just editorial.
Ben and Kurt, real quick, in a meeting I had yesterday, I did find out some information that the new Water Development Board, kind of Hill Country, Trinity, and GAM model is gonna be available for, the next cycle of, DFCs. I think they expect it to be kind of, complete in 2023. So we'll have to see what that brings to the table.
That's good to know, George, yeah. The other thing too I want to share, George, is we had a meeting with Hill Country Alliance, it was myself and Micah and Milan. And anyways, we're talking about the ARPA dollars, the federal dollars that are coming to Kendall County, and the county has said, hey, we'd be interested in working with you guys to improve our knowledge of our water supply. And one thing we have been talking about is potentially putting in a lot more monitoring wells. And we're just lighting the load on us, kind of seeing if we could outsource some of the grant application stuff or some of the paperwork to some of the Hill Country Alliance staff. We'll see how that goes. But nonetheless, I'm throwing that out there as a consideration for you all if you do have opportunity to access those dollars, if it's helpful to you. For us, we have great monitoring, but we want to talk about it.
Excellent. I know we've been working with Marcus Gary at the Edwards, and they're doing some work along the kind of transition line there, and they've got a few monitor wells kind of along the Cibolo area in Comal County, so we're sharing information with them and Comal County also, so. And that goes back to that kind of regional approach there. I do believe we could do a better job. How we get that started, who mandates it, or who kind of drives it, I don't know at this point.
Well, we're thinking if we can put the wells in and get them all tied up to the Texas Water Development Board system, handling all the telemetry stuff, then potentially it's not quite one and done, but the maintenance costs may not be too onerous so that we can maintain this over the long run. But the cost is putting in those monitoring wells in the first place, and we can manage with those dollars.
Thank you, George. I'll make one
Sure.
note before we move on, unless George has anything else to say, but I don't know if people caught when he was talking about Fair Oaks, our relationship with George and the Trinity Glenrose. If you're not aware, the law says that if the city straddles between two groundwater districts, they can choose which groundwater district they are in. So Fair Oaks chose to be within Trinity Glenrose, and so that's why his groundwater district extends up into Kendall County. So they're actually part of the Kendall County within our boundary. He showed that on his map, but if you weren't aware of how that happened, that was a choice that City of Fair Oaks made when they had that opportunity. So.
Yeah, and I'm working with Mike, and we're still trying to work out a few hiccups. When the City of Fair Oaks extended or incorporated their whole ETJ a couple years ago, there were a couple of hiccups that we're trying to finalize as far as which district they'll lie in, so.
Well, thank you very much, George.
No, anytime.
Anyone else have any questions for Mr. Wisman?
Thank you, Mr. Wisman, I appreciate you sharing your time here with us.
Sure.
Well, it doesn't look like we have Gene here today. I don't know if you'll be able to make it, but Gene Williams is the general manager for the Headwaters Groundwater Conservation District of Kerr County. So one of our other neighbors who if you kind of look at the kind of regional strategy, there's a lot of relationship between them and comfort and water that goes across. Actually, I think our only export permit we have in Kendall County is at that district boundary and goes into Kerr County. And so there's the water transfer that happens right now between counties, and so that's with the Headwaters. So we'll maybe look to get him when he's available next time to come talk to us. But so the next gentleman we have here with us, and kind of was mentioned, George mentioned his company, but from Canyon Lake Water Supply, who is, you've heard the news that they're taking over Kendall West Utilities, and Mr. Larry Biddle, their general manager, is here in the room with us, and he asked him to come, and he came to our Cow Creek meeting last week, and thought it was a good opportunity to maybe have him come visit with this group as well, just because they're going to be taking over Kendall West and be a presence within our water infrastructure here in the county. So, Larry, you want to?
Yeah, Mr. Biddle.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. We appreciate the opportunity to introduce ourselves. My name is Larry Biddle. I'm the general manager of Canyon Lake Water. We go under many names. Our legal name is SJWTX, San Jose Water, Texas. We're a subsidiary of the SJW Group, which is the third largest investor-owned utility in the nation right now. Our philosophy that comes down from our CEO is water is local. And that's exactly what you folks are talking about is local water today. One of the things that I appreciate that you guys are talking about is conservation, working together. Where are pipelines? How do we interconnect? How do we have interlocal agreements so we can help each other? These are all things that are important not only to us as a utility, but I think to all utilities. Water being local, we all understand each other's issues and needs, and we want to work together with the groundwater groups, the county, the local cities, to do what we can to make sure that we're providing the level of service that our customers expect, and we're protecting the aquifer, the environment, and doing the things that you expect of us. I really don't have a lot to, I don't have a presentation. I just wanted to make an introduction. We're available to you. We have resources available. You're talking about mapping. We certainly have GIS maps. We can do those kinds of things. We do have a conservation plan. You talked a little bit about the developer agreements and how do we condense that. We do have it in our developer agreements where if you want to have a large amount of sod, then you're going to pay more on your LUE fees. We don't charge an impact fee. We call an LUE fee. And so that's one of the incentives that we have is that if you want to develop, then you can pay this much if you're going to have lesser amounts of sod and green space. Or if you decide, if your development wants to have larger coverage than that, then you're going to pay more upfront. So there are incentives that we have in place. We do have a conservation program. It's much like the city. It's in its infancy. It has a small budget. We've done some this year. We've done a few projects. Irrigation audits is one of them. We're going to continue that. We want to grow our conservation program because that's kind of the first strategy. There's two things that we look at, and that's one, controlling our water loss or unaccounted for water. That's very important to us to be able to maintain that low number, because if we're pumping it out of the ground and we're not selling it, then it's unaccounted for, and that's not good. So we look at those types of things as a way to do that. The other thing that we do is we have smart meters. We have one system in Hays County. It's right on the borderline of Hays and Travis County. It's called Deer Creek, that we acquired probably 2 years ago now. And we've completely turned that into an AMI system. It's a fixed base network for meter reads. And our water loss went from 18% to less than 5%, just by changing those meters and having a smart program. Our IT group is working on something called WaterSmart, which SAWS already has, which allows a customer portal, which allows customers, again, to be able to take a look at what their usage is and self-govern how they're using their water. So meter programs, conservation programs, all of those are helpful in curtailing and minimizing unaccounted for water and allowing the customer to understand what their usage patterns look like. And there's always the rates. Rates are a good deterrent for excessive use. And so, but they're not the most impactful, like you said. And you've always got to be cognizant of those folks that you can't raise it so that you've got to be able to meet their standard of living. So that's just a brief little bit about what we are. I hope I can be invited and become a member of this organization and see what we can do to play a role to help you guys, and in turn it will help us. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions, we weren't happy to answer, if I can.
Yeah, I got a couple, and then I think
I'm sure you're gonna get off questions right.
Okay.
I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
I was gonna say, Patrick, he's offering, I know, John Mark, who was on the call earlier, is already part of this committee, and the intent was to have Kendall West as part of this committee, and if, as Canyon Lake or San Jose takes over the operation of Kendall West, it seems fitting that, with
Absolutely. And just so you'll know, this, the STM, the sale transfer merger, it's been submitted to the Texas Public Utility Commission for approval. And that process is probably, we're thinking maybe November, before it ever gets approval. You know, they can always deny it, but
That was my next question to you. If you told us that at Cow
Yeah.
Creek the other day, what your timing was for this
yeah,
transition.
we're thinking October, November.
Okay.
So,
And at that time, it'll, Kendall West management team would be completely out of the
yes,
equation, and then
right.
your management team would be in place.
But in the meantime, we think it's all gonna happen. We're very positive about going forward. So we wanna be on the front end of this and be a part of the community. Because we're just right, even though we're right next door, we're in Comal County, so we're right next door. We've worked with George in the past and talked to him about some of the limitations on pumping and some of these projects that he's talked about and how they would impact us in Comal County. So we definitely are looking to be a player in it and do what we can do to help you.
Great, thank you. Obviously, you guys have some good ideas and some tools you're using, so we appreciate your insights. Any questions?
Well, I was just thinking I'd throw something out there. So, I've been on the City's Unified Development Co-Committee, I'm on the Transportation Planning Committee, I'm on this committee. And it's funny because one of the things that we often run into, or I've run into, is people complaining about what's often called the Bernie wall. And it's like, oh, well, you guys are against anything that wants to come in. And of course, obviously, just not everything can be stopped. But really, when I reflect on that, my interpretation of it is that we're a community of standards. Like, we really say, is this really going to be good for our community, short-term and long-term? And let's really make sure that we're vetting all options really effectively. Now, I'm not saying that's our dynamic here. Like, we don't have a choice with you all, if you will. But I guess my point is simply to say that I really hope that, as we go forward working with you all and as your utility influences development in our region, that we could maybe think about things in terms of, what is the new model that's the smarter way to manage water? And of course, you guys are in this to make money, and one of the conversations I have with a lot of people is that water is underpriced. And so, if you can sell fewer hydrocarbons for more dollars, then that could be actually both holistically beneficial, where you guys make money and we also are maintaining a more secure water supply instead of, hitting a severe drought scenario and then, oops, we've tapped out, or we're cutting off, or cutting back severely to the point of potentially harming some. So I'm just throwing that out there, that, I look at this region as an opportunity to reformat how we do development and how we think about resource management and up our game. I'd love it if JW TX could join us in that sort of regional leadership.
Yeah, we'd love to meet with you, talk about that, how we move forward.
Other statements or questions? Anybody on the call that would like to?
If I could say something, I just want to applaud Larry and Tom out there with Canyon Lake Water Supply, because I know they've been approached by Texas Water Supply about buying water supply, and they've always come to us and kind of asked for some of the background and some of the potential effects. So I don't know if Bernie's been approached at this point, but probably will be in the future. But I just wanted to applaud Canyon Lake Water Supply.
Thanks, George.
Sorry, I didn't mean hydrocarbons.
I got you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Appreciate it.
So as far as updates, other updates from the planning committee, Tom is not here to his notes, but I don't actually have anything other than conversation comment I had yesterday. And it kind of, to me, speaks a little bit about Mayor Handren's charge to us at the beginning about getting some deliverables and getting on schedule and trying to do something, with a little bit of sense of urgency. And Mayor Handren mentioned the SAWS, Kendall West, or Canyon Lake sort of interconnectivity and kind of looking at that broader picture within the region. But Tom and I were having this conversation yesterday about, we need to start asking the questions, maybe it's the city of Bernie questions of, do you want to be does the city of Bernie want to be a water utility in the future? Or is the future for city of Bernie to merge or join with somebody else? Or what is that long-term future for the city of Bernie look like? annexing, and we've done some annexing recently, and those areas that have annexed, some of them, like Shoreline out there, is actually served by Kendall West Utilities. So you have Kendall West and Canyon Lake within the city limits of Vernon, right? So it's, there's another utility within the city limits of Vernon, so it's definitely something that's current, it's not future, and then, but how does that look from a planning standpoint for the future? So I think we can add it to maybe a future agenda item, and people can cogitate on it, and we can kind of answer that question of how, and get some insight from the city on what type of data or information would help you make a decision long term.
I'd like to hear some of our additional neighbors speak to this, and maybe plant some seeds. You know, Mr. Williams wasn't able to make it. We'd also like to hear from any other neighbors that you guys feel like are or should be at the table. Right.
So a couple of reflections just as we get into this sort of the cogitation mode, as you said. You know, the reasons for burning to form its own utility, I guess, I see two reasons, and Jeff, you might enlighten us with more, but one would be, of course, revenue generating, because the utility can generate revenue for the city, and cities are expensive to operate. The other one, of course, would be to influence development outcomes and create development agreements, because as it feels a little bit like it's Wild West out in the county as far as almost anything goes development relative to what we're trying to do here in the city and create quality outcomes that preserve preserve the hill country character of our regions, maintain quality natural resources, things like that. That we don't have the ability to influence that in the county without maybe having a utility role that can be leveraged.
Specifically water utility you're talking about, of course.
Yes, yes.
And that is the case. I mean, in 1928, when we drilled the first wells, it was just to try to get water to people in the town. But I would say in the modern era, whatever you want to call that, the last 40, 50 years, it's been the water supply that's helped us to, whatever you want to call it, manage, control, restrict, growth. That's what has done that. And legislatively, we've been pushed kind of into a corner as far as annexation and things like that. So it is one of the only remaining viable tools. As has been mentioned, we don't control all of that. There are other entities like Kendall West that serve within the city limits due to, I would say, more financial limitations, you know, like some of the areas we talked about, Shoreline and so forth. I mean, when you're talking about adding a whole other plane to your water supply to be able to supply, you're talking many millions of dollars, and that is a stretch for the city. It may not be for a larger utility, but it would be for the city of Bernie still. Yeah, giving up the utility, I think you give up a lot going forward. So that's a conversation that I think will take a long time to cogitate.
Well, I wonder if there could be another conversation with, for example, San Jose Water around what our regional goals are. You know, you're thinking about water as local, but, you know, what is it to be part of a community? And I get that it's a business, but, you know, businesses can play a role in creating a positive outcome for a community.
Right.
That's a pretty, maybe it's a tall order to ask for that kind of ethics or moral thinking, if you will, or community level thinking of any company, organization. I don't know. I kind of feel like, well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's okay to say, hey, we would like to achieve some really quality development outcomes and perhaps
inherent differences in the business practices of utilities that are owned by the public versus utilities that are owned by investors and who they answer to. And so, you know, the cities own water utilities. There's also some water utilities in our area that are owned by investors and answer to their stockholders. So those are things, you know, to think about as we consider how this data might be used in intergovernmental cooperation and utility cooperation, all those kind of things.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Good point.
And this is Donovan, I would just say, certainly, you know, we had the Eaton Harn group that will ultimately serve as a wholesale, but we were able to kind of secure them complying with various regulations that they wouldn't be able to, or they wouldn't have to respond to otherwise. So I think there is certainly a model to do that. Some people may disagree with that model, but that is certainly an alternative. In terms of turning it into a deliverable, I mean, there's a whole lot of, I guess, questions out there. What is the problem they're trying to solve for, I guess, is the main question. And I'm not sure, are we convinced that there is a water supply need and what year that is, and is the city of Boerne in need of a certain amount of water supply? I mean, there's certainly conceptual frameworks to solve some of those problems, but if there isn't a need for that particular water supply, then maybe you move to something like a conservation approach, or you move to a UDC type of approach. But I think for me, it's really defining what that question is and what that problem is that we're trying to solve for. And I say that problem, I'm sure it's a number of issues, but.
Well, and it's going to be a moving target, because we don't know how many people are going to be in 50 years old, we just estimate. But the concept is let's put the models in place so we can start doing those estimations. Let's start trying to talk about what things might look like, what might be required, because if we don't start to do at least some fundamental planning, then there won't be any way to catch up. So that's the overarching concern, and that makes the deliverable somewhat vague by nature, but maybe the deliverable is at least a process for getting to that next step. What steps are involved in resource management, better resource management, both from a quantity and quality standpoint, and what does collaboration look like? I mean, is this going to continue to be a series of silos, or is there something regionally that can be done that makes sense and that everybody can get behind? Those are bigger questions than I'm sure we can answer, but we better ask the questions and lay a foundation for getting answers so that those people who are responsible for answering them can make appropriate queries and get answers. So I think maybe that's a scratching the surface of how we go about it next. I think it seems to me that, and we're building in some of the what ifs on the backside. You're telling me that internet water's coming online, but here we think we're going to have something there. Got Vianney's models, I don't know if those can be extrapolated.
I'm biting my tongue right now as far as some of the questions you're posing.
Okay, but those are things that I think that we've been starting to ask the questions already.
Yep.
So to Donovan's point, there's probably some bad news out there, or at least some estimates of some bad news. And so that's why we're here, is to figure out, okay, well, this is our worst case scenario, or most reasonable estimate of the worst case scenario, then how do we plan for it? And so I think we got to get as many people around the table that are willing to come around the table, talk about shared responsibilities, and who's willing to do what, and what is practical. From the lesson. And
jump in for a second here. I'd like to just reflect on some of the stuff that the mayor mentioned earlier today in his goals, and then reflect even farther back on is how we came together as a committee. And I think Donovan pointed out a key element. We have not yet defined the need. I mean, we started with a report that the mayor did not believe adequately reflected how we were going to address water and bleachers, but underlying that was his belief that there's a problem, couldn't quantify it. And I think we were brought together to try to quantify that, validate it, and move it forward. And I think when he asked for deliverables today, I think what I heard was he was asking for us to determine, for the public's benefit, for the city's benefit, whether there's a problem or not. You know, can we live with the data that was in the original report, or we need to revise that report, look at the needs, decide if the city's got enough water to meet its future needs, and then move on to the process of figuring out where does that additional water come from. And I think one of the things that I would like to see us do is really kind of nail down, and I was hoping that the Internet of Water would start providing us a tool to answer some of those questions. But I think whatever tool we need to define better what we think, what our best belief is, what that need for the future is, and then say, okay, you know, that's going to be a deterrent for the growth in the city, for the financial benefit of the city, and you know, lay that out as our challenge. I feel like we're working without the challenge right now. I'm not sure if anybody feels that way, but it just seems like we're collecting this data, we're bringing the partners together, all the things that we need to do on a regional consideration, but we're not addressing the city of Burning's potential problem. And I'd like to see us maybe sit down with that report, look at the numbers, plug back in those population growth numbers, look at the water numbers and say, is this thing, how far off is it, and what do we need to do, and when is that threshold, when do we hit that threshold? And you start using that as a guidance for how we put together our deliverables. So I think, you know, the other thing I guess I heard today was, while we were looking at this on a regional basis, it's really the city problem. What the mayor's asking us to do is to fix the city
I
problem.
respectfully disagree. We're looking at something much larger than the city. This is Kendall County, we all live here, and this is a Kendall County problem. This is not a city problem.
Well,
It's originating with the city because the city leadership is willing to step up and take a bite at the apple. But it's not strictly a city problem, and it will always be a county problem because we're related with our adjacent neighbors. We're uniquely governed in that way. Everybody who is a city resident is also a county resident.
well, that's true.
And so we've got to start thinking about ourselves collectively. And if we don't, do so at our peril.
No, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't think collectively. I'm just saying that the city, what I'm hearing is the city has tools and ability to deal with some of these issues that just doesn't exist at the county level or a broader regional level. Those all have to be collaborative and cooperative, but the city actually has mechanisms that we can bring into play that, you know, all the things that the mayor listed there, the council updates, the backup water source, the room board, those are all things that can be done at the city level. I have not heard yet how we do that at the county level or at the broader regional level. All I'm suggesting is that we work for that package to give the city some tools immediately. And if we can expand that broader, hey, let's go for it. But
I think that we should look to try to do it broader because I think what's going to work in the city largely can be something that can be amplified out in the county. Whether or not we have the tools from a financial incentive standpoint, whatever, the mayor is going to have those. And you're right, the county doesn't have the same regulatory authority. But those who provide utilities to them, to the extent it's not somebody on the well, then there's leverage there too, there's value there. And so that's why it does need to be a regional approach. That's why everybody needs to look at this as a common problem. If we look at it from a silo standpoint, it's what has got us here. And we can take care of ourselves, but who's going to be knocking at the door next door? And then it becomes a race for who gets the biggest grab of water. And I don't think that's a good solution.
I think it might be.
And if it is, then we can take Mr. Manson's report and everybody ought to move in the city, and if you don't live in the city, it's just tough.
But I think it may also go to Kurt's point as well, is looking at the role of the utility. Is that, you know, do we want the utility to serve on a broader region and use the city administration as that tool? You know, or do we want to rely on collaborative effects that may have pretty loose strings?
Well, and those are important questions, but I think we need to try to provide some data and say, these are things that you need to
Oh,
consider.
absolutely.
You want to get bigger, you want to get smaller, you want to stay where you are.
Yep.
And what are the benefits and the challenges of each of those?
Tom, the model that DNA's created, is looking at exactly the entire picture, for burning, right? So not the whole county, that's the challenge, is how do we then, tie in the rest of the county, but it actually will answer some of those questions for you, as far as, how much growth can we maintain, what's our, how far out can we go if we require more King Lake water, where's conservation gonna take us, and what does that look like? It does, or at least seeks to answer that. How perfectly, I don't know, we'll find out, or we'll get a sense of it. But
The concept, alluded that those would be answers that would be forthcoming, so it'd be really interesting to see how well the model actually works then.
Well, and to that point, what we were trying to do is get neighbors to provide data. That's been somewhat limited what we've gotten, but I think if we can have our neighbors start providing some of that data, then it can be plugged into the model or modeling ability. It can be tweaked somewhat to expand it. And the idea was that would help us get county covered. And then we started talking about, other providers. And we just need the appropriate folks to get involved and make it possible for us to get that information. Since SAWS was the only participant in providing information the last time I checked on that. But that speaks to Mr. McConnell, who's going to be helping us out at Bird Dogs on this stuff. Since most all of us have had a hard time getting where we need to go, Nick is going to help us quarterback some of the stuff and put pencil to paper in terms of getting from this meeting to the next meeting to turning things into deliverables. So I want to applaud him on the front before he gets all the weight put on his shoulders, which, as you can see, is forthcoming. So, I believe we did get copies of the letters that we sent out to regional providers. I would say that is a relatively high priority to get that information back from those folks. I don't know why they wouldn't provide the information, so I'd ask if you can help us. And then whatever you need in terms of additional follow-ups, telephone calls, letters, whatever it is that you need to help accomplish that, please let us know. But
Absolutely. So I look forward to actually working with this whole group and kind of getting the deliverables out, right? We kind of talked about a bunch of different things and a bunch of different routes. I think to Patrick's point, it's very pertinent for all of us to set kind of a deadline and establish when we need these things by and what that next step is. Mayor at the beginning obviously spoke to a couple of deliverables that he's kind of looking for in this. And I think it's important that we work toward that as well as encompassing this whole broad picture we've been talking about this entire time. It is a collaborative effort, it truly is, and it's going to take one of us pushing in and making sure we do what we need to do in a timely fashion to get this out and done into the public.
And what I heard from the mayor was by year end, he wants 1, 2, and 3 in some form or fashion, right? And 1 and 2 don't seem all unobtainable. 3 is a little bit more sheer. It seems to me that we can work backwards, saying that we want to deliver something in December for 1 and 2. Just looking at the time schedules you guys have, everybody here has other things to do in life. And what I don't want to do is overwhelm any one person. But it seems like I'm trying to connect December with now. The thing that I heard is that next time we need to kind of do a parade of options, right? Does that sound right? Okay, so we have our parade of options on the conservation end of things. Next meeting, let's call it 1 month from now. Is that too soon?
I agree that timelines are motivating. It doesn't mean you always meet them.
No.
UBC meeting, your committee is supposed to wrap in 6 months.
And
It
I don't
took us
want to
2
do
years
something
to do it well.
So I don't want to do something false.
But I think motivation. So.
Well, I mean, is that realistic? Can we get
I think, I mean, again, hearing us alone can bring us a heck of a lot of perspective on conservation strategies. And if I can augment that with the Austin folks, I don't know if we do that in a month or if we take Karen Guz's stuff and then I go back to the Austin folks and say, all right, what would you pad it with? And could you bring that to us? Do you know what I mean?
How much time do you think that you need to try to coordinate that?
I mean, to coordinate what?
To get the information, and to the extent you gotta make people available to speak.
Yeah, well, let's push for a month from now, honestly.
Okay, let's set it tentatively.
Okay. And then,
All right.
and again, those are my two top of the line things. I already have a short list of construction solutions that I can circulate to everybody, that's derived from, yeah. The conservation ordinances from San Antonio, Donovan, I don't know what you can provide to us in that regard, but I can see that being a great shortcut for the city.
And
And then I'm gonna talk to Ashley at Internet of Water to get, and I think we already actually had this conversation when we had our subcommittee for our meetings, but, to get basically a wire diagram of how that system works, and therefore we can see how easy it will be for plug and play.
Okay.
Data solution. So I can work on that over the next month for sure.
Okay. So if we have that list, say it takes, that's August, another month to digest it and turn it into a series of priorities, 1, 2, 3, ABC. It's September, maybe first draft October, polish it in November, presentation in December, for 1 and 2. Is that reasonable?
I think
With
so.
some cushion,
Yeah, you can listen to it. Yeah.
because, I mean, we've got 2.5 months in there drafting, so that seems like a fair amount of time. I mean, you don't think so, Tom?
Well, no, I mean, so, you know, from my perspective, I'm fairly visual. I'd love to see it, you know, as a list of, you know, here you list it, but then at the same time, it's like, yeah, but what's that full scope really look like? I mean, if it's creating this sort of menu of options, yeah, that's totally viable if we're starting to go into more esoteric questions.
It's a little hard too, because we don't know how much work has already been done. So is this probably drove down a great deal, if you have that. Same thing with Austin. Some things just won't work for us from a scale standpoint or whatever. What I think, Nick, you and I could do is probably lay out a series of agendas between now and then that cover these topics and say, where should our benchmarks be along that path? And that might help you visually. But the best thing will be seeing what the need is, because you really can't cut it up until you see it.
And you know, part of this is just an interim step, right? So it's that first step in a series of steps. So you may just be presenting the high level of that, but you'll be drilling down eventually, right? Is indeed where this committee wants to go. And maybe that's the next step. So you have that first wide step, which says here are a series of recommendations. And then you have a cleaner cut, more precise, hey, this is our specific recommendation for this group that we talked about our overall. So, and that can come at a later date.
I get it. I totally get it.
It's a lot, it truly is.
Well, no, well, I actually don't feel that overwhelmed by it, frankly. I mean, I'm used to creating the wish list, if you will.
So Ben, keep us in the room on that, like I've offered before, between Mike, Brian, and myself. Because again, there may be some great ideas that are absolutely beyond our ability to do. And so we should focus on the ones that we absolutely can do.
Teamwork, so that sounds great.
And I'll be honest, I'm gonna be reaching out to everybody at different points in time, because I'm again, new to this. I have been watching prior meetings and kind of been brought up to speed, but in no way, shape, or form I'm an expert, right? So I'll be asking a lot of the guy on the street questions.
Okay. Kurt, can you help get our other members here next time?
Yes, sir.
And Nick and I will try to get those who we've reached out to already to at least respond so we can look at that. And it would be really nice if they would come to the table and talk about what their concerns are going forward, if they've had the opportunity to really dive down into them and investigate that. But that's
No, I'm good.
Hey, we take all kinds of criticism, good and bad. Mr. Mann, any further thoughts?
Oh, just let us know what you need, and we'll be happy to help.
Thank you. Donovan, anything from you?
I'm looking forward to it. So we'll have, I don't know, I guess you'll set a date, but I'll work with Karen to come to that next meeting, and I'll have to get her a little bit closer in terms of what the exact agenda is that she needs to talk about. I assume she's going to talk about what programs we have in place and what we've seen is successful, and maybe some of those benchmarks along the way. But if you want me to focus on anything else, just let me know.
Thanks, sir.
I mean, so you could have a pre-meeting with her, just not to necessarily coach what we want to hear, but just to kind of already get some perspective that I can start digging into, and perhaps working with the city folks.
Happy to attend that as well.
If that's okay. Just so
And
that.
I'll talk to her, I don't know her schedule, and so she also has an amazing team of people that do some of this, so she might have somebody else to either come along with her or even present what's, but I will definitely try to get her.
Right on, that'd be great.
Also on those, when we start talking about programs, and realizing there's usually implementation costs, any background anybody can share about funding sources to support the implementation of those programs would be really helpful too, so we know what to chase.
Makes sense. Mr. Westman, thank you for joining us today. Do you have any parting thoughts?
None at this point, but I'd be happy to answer any future questions the committee may have.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for coordinating. Kurt, could I trouble you to update Mr. Nichols? Yeah. Just because I'm going to do a better job than I can, and we'll probably be able to help you more with some of these other issues. And I'll reach out to Larry and talk to him about how he might be able to help. From a scheduling standpoint, we'll circulate available dates, but then I'm gonna kind of look to you for, you tell me what you need from a time standpoint, so that there's an arbitrary date out there.
I'm going to try to move pretty quick toward having a meeting with the sauce folks and start downloading what they know, and I'll reach out to the Austin folks and see if they can get them as well, pretty quick.
So tentatively, let's shoot for a meeting for the end of August. Unless you say otherwise. Anything further? Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. The meeting. I have two big deal comment, it's just that when it comes to water, and it's not, everybody goes to beach and picture we can't print water. So it's, to me, when you start talking about the too big to fail, it's always the other organization. It really was, the too big to fail thing actually wasn't a,
Still some market, not a market.
right, it wasn't marketing, right? So the market, capitalism was the level market, it was intended to be something.
Somebody doesn't